There is no doubt that making the move to step away from toxicity can be difficult, but at the end of the day, it overrides the discomfort of staying in a dynamic that is stifling your growth.
Welcome to The Change Effect, the podcast that helps you turn life transitions into powerful new beginnings. One story, one shift, one breakthrough at a time. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, leadership coach, and change strategist who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders break through barriers to create success on their own terms. I now work with women to step into change to create a life they love. Whether you're putting yourself at the center of your own story, redefining success, or making a power pivot in your life, career, or business, you're in the right place. Each week, we dive into conversations with trailblazers, change makers, and everyday women experiencing the ripple effects that come from overcoming the fear and doing it anyway, providing actionable steps, practical strategies, and a whole lot of fun along the way. So if you're ready to step up and become unstoppable, buckle up and let's get started.
There's a moment most of us can look back on when we knew a relationship we were in wasn't good for us, and still we stayed. It's that moment, that quiet knowing that I want to talk about today. Because toxic relationships rarely start out that way. They usually start with connection, shared experience, mutual support, history, and over time, something shifts. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's situational, sometimes it's gradual enough that you adapt without realizing you're adapting. And these dynamics don't just show up in friendships. They show up in families, romantic relationships, professional environments, leadership relationships, client relationships, and the relationships you have with the entire systems you exist inside of. And if you are someone who is known for being strong, capable, and steady, you're often the person who stays the longest because you know how to hold complexity. Now, today I want to talk about what toxic relationships look like in our personal and professional lives, why smart, self-aware people stay in them, and the cost of talking ourselves out of leaving them behind. Now, first, let's talk about what toxic relationships actually look like in real life. Let me start out by saying the word toxic doesn't necessarily mean evil or ill-intended. It just means the dynamic consistently costs you more than it gives. Since toxic dynamics rarely announce themselves, they tend to build slowly. They normalize over time and often live inside relationships that also have good moments. That's what makes them so hard to recognize because there is a pattern that begins to form below the surface. Now let's break this down into how they may show up personally and professionally. Now in personal relationships, the toxicity can show up in one-sided friendships. This is where you become the processor, stabilizer, or problem solver. And this can look like conversations that constantly revolve around the other person, you leaving interactions feeling emotionally exhausted, you editing your own experiences to avoid adding to their plate, or maybe you feeling responsible for keeping emotional temperatures stable within the relationship. Now, it's sad to say, but we've all experienced this at least once in our lives, where you're giving more than you're receiving. And over time, you become drained and stifled by constantly being the sounding board. Now, toxicity can also show up in family, right? Family obligation or guilt. This is where you feel like your role is pre-assigned within the family structure. Maybe you're the reliable one, always being asked to put your life second to what's expected of you by family members. Or you're expected to absorb tension and keep everyone happy. Or maybe boundaries get framed as betrayal. Once you set them, you're kind of met with those rolled eyes or immediate pushback. And because of this dynamic, in many cases, you may feel like growth requires distancing, right? Getting away from it. It no longer feels safe to be yourself in a place that you used to call home. Now, the insidious part of this is over time, this can become a trap because of the history you have with your family unit and the place you've always had within it. It makes leaving it behind feel like betrayal because you're breaking what may seem like an unspoken contract. Now, toxicity can also show up in romantic relationships. And I always call this, it's kind of like romantic sabotage, right? The tricky part about this one is that it is typically not revealed by an explosive conflict. Instead, it could be that subtle criticism hidden in everyday interaction, or dismissal of goals or ambitions that you have as arbitrary or less important than that of your loved one, or control disguised as concern or sympathy, keeping you down and leaving you to feel more confined, or decisions subtly defaulting to their comfort zone. not taking your needs into consideration. Over time, you slowly become smaller for them to maintain stability. Now, in professional relationships, the dynamics can feel equally unsettling and constrictive. In the workplace especially, toxicity can be hidden in everyday work dynamics and become more difficult to spot. This may be where you start managing bosses who lead you through unpredictability or pressure. You have to stay hyper attuned to their behavior and end up dancing around them to keep things in balance. This is where maybe their mood determines the team energy. So if it's a bad day for them, the entire group feels it. Or their expectations shift without warning, consistency becomes lost, and there's no goalposts at all to understand what success looks like. This could also show up as praise followed by withdrawal. This is typically a sign of an ineffective manager, where direct communication is avoided, leaving you feeling completely disoriented. And last is where you find yourself over preparing to avoid criticism, and this can be exhausting. The crazy thing about this is your nervous system starts living at work, even when you're not there, leading to a level of burnout that's hard to unwind. Now, you can also find yourself facing work cultures that reward over-functioning. I know many of you probably can feel this pain, and I know I did in my past. This is where you become valuable because you absorb the chaos. Often, this shows up with high performers, and you could be the one who's always expected to sort of figure things out or left to find solutions even in the most chaotic or mismanaged situations. Leadership may end up leaning on you emotionally or operationally, leaving you feeling like the unofficial fixer, someone who's accountable for the success of everyone else. And this can also leave you waiting for those promotions or recognition that never comes because, once again, overachieving is what is simply expected of you. Lastly, this can show up in client relationships. You may find yourself placating to clients who ignore boundaries. You start negotiating with your own standards and agreeing to conditions that aren't in alignment with your business goals. And this could be when responding to things like weekend calls, and that just becomes the norm. Or when scope creep becomes relationship maintenance. Or it could be when you start justifying your lack of boundaries as high-touch service, when you know deep down it's just your inability to say no. This can all lead to resentment of work you used to enjoy. Now, this one can be super subtle and one of the hardest ones to detect, especially when just starting out as a business owner, until you realize that people-pleasing instead of setting clear boundaries has a profound effect on the success or failure of your business. So with all this said, why are highly capable people more susceptible to this toxicity? This is the part I care deeply about because I see it consistently with leaders, founders, and high-achieving women that I work with. First, there is an identity investment that takes over. So when a role or relationship becomes part of your identity, leaving or upsetting its balance feels like self-erasure. You may be thinking things like, I'm the strong one in this family, or I'm the person who built this team, or I'm the one people rely on. And the crazy thing is, the longer you've been in the role, the more it feels like stepping away means stepping into an unknown version of yourself. The next is hope attachment. And this is where you remember the beginning, the good phase, the times they showed up fully. And your brain keeps replaying evidence that this could soon return. You build decisions around potential future behavior rather than consistent current behavior. And this can become a cyclical nightmare until you stop the pattern. There's also competence conditioning, where you've been rewarded your whole life for solving complex situations. So you approach relationship strain like a puzzle or a leadership challenge or a communication problem. And you assume if you just find the right approach, you can stabilize the situation. Meanwhile, the dynamic continues to go unchanged. Then there's scarcity thinking. This shows up as, what if I never get another opportunity like this? Or what if I lose momentum? Or if I'm misread by saying something that feels right to me? Even extremely successful people feel this when identity and status are involved. Last but certainly not least is social conditioning around likability and loyalty, the biggest trap of all, especially for high-performing women. You are rewarded for being adaptable, easy to work with, low maintenance, emotionally steady. Walking away from this can trigger deep discomfort because it conflicts with how you've been socially reinforced. So now that we see how your thinking can keep you in a toxic loop, let's talk about the pitfalls of avoiding the truth. So when we avoid ending toxic dynamics, we don't stay neutral. We end up paying the price. There's an emotional cost, low-grade dread, energy drain that feels like burnout, or loss of self-trust. There's a professional cost, playing smaller than your actual capacity, becoming reactive instead of strategic, or having career stagnation masked as stability. And then there's a psychological cost. You start rewriting your own reality. You say, maybe I'm too sensitive, or maybe I expect too much. Maybe this is just how it all works. The hard truth is, the longer we override our internal signals, the harder it is to hear them. So paying attention to them is critical when it comes to maintaining healthy relationships in any area of our life. There is no doubt that making the move to step away from toxicity can be difficult, but at the end of the day, it overrides the discomfort of staying in a dynamic that is stifling your growth. So always remember this: the real work is not ending the relationship. The real work is trusting yourself enough to believe what you already know and stepping out of the dysfunction to embrace what's on the other side. That's it for now. Until next time. Thank you for listening to The Change Effect. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed this episode, so more women like you can find us and take their next step toward creating a life they love.